All right, a disapproval resolution in the Senate against President Biden's shot or test mandate for business is expected to pass as soon as tonight. Two Democrat senators, Joe Manchin of West Virginia and John Tester of Montana, have already expressed their support for the formal challenge to President Biden's mandate, which was filed by all 50 Senate Republicans last month. With the Biden administration getting blocked now at every turn in the courts, we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel on this mandate. Earlier today, the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, had this to say about the president's mandates.
The United States of America is a free country. The federal government, elites in Washington, cannot micromanage citizens' personal choices without a legitimate basis in law and the Constitution. And that goes double for presidents going far beyond the bounds of their office and their authority. President Biden's absurd private sector vaccine mandate is blatant overreach.
Well, joining me now to talk about this blatant overreach and more is Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa. He is the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Glad to be with you, Tony, anytime you want me.
So give us a status on the vote on the Congressional Review Act, which would disapprove the president's mandate on private businesses. Are we going to see a vote on that tonight?
6:45. I think it'll pass, as you indicated. I think that it backs up what I've said when the president first said he was going to issue this mandate to private business to mandate any company that has 100 or more employees to do it. I thought it was unconstitutional at that time. I said if he asked Congress to pass legislation to make it, he could do it. That probably would be unconstitutional too, but I would vote against that anyway. So today I have a chance to express my view on a regulation that probably has been already declared unconstitutional by several courts, but it gives Congress a chance to express our view that we disagree with the president, and it's called the Congressional Review Act. So a regulation can come up and not a 60-vote requirement, but just a 51-vote requirement. We can overturn that. Now, it has to go to the House. They may not overturn it, but I welcome an opportunity to show the people of Iowa that I don't think the federal government should be violating personal freedom and telling people what to do. I happen to think vaccine is a good thing. I would advise people to get it, but I'm not going to have the government force people to do it. They ought to make that choice their own. And they shouldn't listen to politicians. They ought to listen to their doctor, what's right for them.
Yeah, I don't want the government sticking it to me. They stick it to us enough. The media kind of dismissive somewhat of this vote that's taking place because, as you pointed out, they're saying it's kind of a symbolic victory for Republicans because it has to go over to the House and probably will not see the light of day in the House. I would argue it's more than symbolic. I think, as you said, it gives you the opportunity to express the intent and will of your constituents. But I think it also shows that you have a Republican Party that is willing to stand up against this administration and that overreach.
Yeah, there's plenty of that, like on the BBB, Build Back Better bill or the reconciliation bill. All 50 Republicans are going to vote against it because we don't think we should be spending another $4 trillion feeding the fires of inflation. But this is also something that deals even more with personal freedom than maybe even that bill does. And we ought to back the principle. In other words, people have a choice, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and let individuals make decisions, or have some government bureaucrat tell you what to do. That's a sharp difference of approach to liberty.
Right. And as you made reference to earlier, we've had several courts in different parts of the country that have pushed pause on the president's vaccine mandates, the latest coming yesterday out of Georgia, where a federal judge there said that the federal contractor mandate requirement for either the testing or the shots was appeared to be an overreach. So the president's striking out in the courts, and this kind of brings us to where you are the ranking member on the Senate Judiciary Committee now, having been the chairman previously. This underscores the importance of the court and the accomplishments made under the Trump administration to put constitutionalists onto the courts.
It was quite a privilege for me to be chair when Gorsuch and Kavanaugh went on, and be a member of the committee when we put Barrett on just before the last election. We have a 6-3 majority. When Roberts decides to do something a little bit different than the majority, we still got a 5-4 majority. We're getting back to the point where the rule of law and the strict construction of those laws, the strict interpretation of the Constitution is paramount now in the Supreme Court of the United States. And that's going to make the principle of limited government more important than ever, because, the federal government can't do anything the Constitution doesn't allow it to do. But with this living Constitution approach that a lot of liberals have, you end up with the government doing almost anything they want to do if they got the Supreme Court backing it up.
Right.
And so that's why what we're doing today in the pursuit of freedom on this congressional review vaccine thing is so important.
Yes, it is. And I, quite frankly, never thought we would have the courts as a backstop for constitutional ideas, because, as you said, the left has controlled the courts for so long that there's been these judicial activists on the courts that have been pushing and carrying the water for the left. And that brings me to the next topic I want to ask you about, Senator Chuck Grassley, is the Biden Supreme Court Commission releasing its report yesterday, saying that really taking no position on the court packing issue. What do you make of the 288-page report of the President's Commission on the courts?
Well, first of all, the commission was to get Biden out of trouble. He knows himself. He made a mistake during the campaign, saying that he was going to set this commission up to study it, or that he had a lot of pressure from the left wing of his party, Bernie's wing of the party, to do something on the court to overcome the trend that's developed since Trump was appointing 3 people. And the commission was his answer to that. And thank God they didn't go to the extreme of recommending that you pack the court. We've had 9 on the Supreme Court since 1869. We've even had people like Justice Ginsburg, before she passed away, said 9 was the perfect number. And we've at least, if this was going to happen, the Constitution would allow the Congress to do it. But with a lot of Democrats, although they haven't said who they are, we just feel like there's a lot of Democrats that would never go along with packing the court. Maybe some of them have spoken out. I don't remember those names, but we think we've got at least 50 in the United States Senate, Republicans and a few Democrats that never let this happen anyway.
So, Senator Grassley, I would think that this commission's report taking no position on court packing would be helpful in preserving the 9 members on the Supreme Court.
Absolutely. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it could happen even if the commission didn't come the direction it did, but it sure helps our position of leaving the court at 9, and that's where it should be, like I said, since 1869.
Is that the last we've heard of this commission? Anything going to come of their report, or, as you said, is this is just to get the president out of a bind?
There might be some aspects of its recommendation that will be put in bill form, but I don't give it much hope. And if the Republicans take over the Congress after the midterm elections, it won't happen.
Senator Chuck Grassley, you led the Republican members on the Judiciary Committee as the ranking member in a letter earlier this week, following up. And I want to say this at the outset. I want to commend you for doing this, because oftentimes what we see is we release statements or we say something and then we move on to the next issue. But you and your colleagues have not let go of what Attorney General Merrick Garland did in his October 4th memo, going along with the National School Boards Association, essentially calling parents who go to school board meetings upset over the indoctrination that is happening with their children. They equated them to domestic terrorists, and you've been pressing the Attorney General to back away from the language that was used. Now, he didn't use it, but the school boards used it, and he has not denounced it. Have you gotten a response from your letter?
No, we haven't, and that's the second letter we've written on the subject, and we'll write a third or fourth letter. It was brought up in his hearing, and he didn't back down any. But can you imagine the school board, not even the board of directors of the School Board Association, and then let's say staff or stuff like that, even in conjunction with the White House, said that we ought to have the Justice Department and the FBI stepping in on some of the potential arguments that are going on before school boards. And so then within 5 days, he issues this memo. And then maybe a couple weeks later, getting pressure from their state affiliates, the National School Board Association withdrew their letter. I think they even apologized for it. So since his actions of sigging the FBI on the school boards, you would think that as long as the instigation of that was the National School Board Association and they backed off, wouldn't he back off? No, he's not going to back off. And I don't think we'll probably get an answer to our letter, but we're not going to let this thing lie, because parent involvement in the education of their kids, freedom of parents, is a very, very important thing. Besides, education is not the main function. It's a very minor function of the federal government. And we want local control of schools. We want state control of schools. We don't want the federal government. And for the FBI, but even worse is the National Security Division of the Justice Department being involved in this, which almost makes it sound like it's a national security issue. Well, and then to make it look like people that show up at school board meetings are potential terrorists. How idiotic can you be in this country of freedom?
Right. And you make that point in your letter, because while the federal government, while the Attorney General did not himself in his correspondence call these parents domestic terrorists, that was in the school board's letter, and has been very clear about that. However, you pressed him to back away from that language and denounce it. And in your letter to him, this latest letter to him, you point out that it's the FBI's counterterrorism division that's a part of this, tracking of parents. So that in and of itself sends a message. Why would you have the counterterrorism division watching what parents do at school board meetings?
To intimidate people, to allow the authority of the state and the authority of the school board in that district not to be pressed on anything. And maybe you don't have to arrest parents, but when they think the FBI is looking over their shoulder or the National Security Division is looking over their shoulder, maybe they're afraid to show up at a town meeting, and you're violating the free speech, the freedom of association, the right to petition your government for redress of grievances, of which are all First Amendment rights. You are doing damage to the First Amendment.
I mean, I can easily envision this in China, maybe Russia, but the United States of America, is this how our government should function?
Well, no, I think common sense tells you that, but you got to realize Washington, D.C. is an island surrounded by reality. The common sense outside of this town, particularly the Midwestern common sense, is what's lacking here in this town, and that's why they try to get away with it. Another thing you got to remember, that in this town, whether it's the private sector or whether it's the government sector, it's all related to the government. So when everything is tied to the government, you think the government can do anything. And they have the economic power through taxation to do it, and then they have the power of the bureaucracy to carry it out. And then we have the legislature over the last several decades delegating so much power to the bureaucracy. It gets us away from the principle of limited government, and we got to get back to that.
Well, and I'm grateful, Senator Chuck Grassley, that you're one of those that's bringing a little bit of that Midwestern common sense to Washington, D.C. Appreciate your leadership on the Judiciary Committee, and we thank you for joining us today here on Washington Watch.
Thank you, Tony. Glad to be with you.